Most aquarium water problems actually start before the water ever reaches your tank. Your tap water might look perfectly clear, but it can contain dozens of dissolved substances that can affect your fish, coral, and algae growth. And the tricky part is, you can't see most of them. For example, you'll see that I'm adding tap water to the glass on the left, and this is what most people would think about putting into their tanks. And then the glass on the right is RODI water. In this video, we're going to break down what's actually inside aquarium water, why it matters, and how experienced aquarists control it. Because once you understand what's in the water, a lot of common aquarium problems suddenly start making sense. Fish and coral live in a very different environment than most animals we keep. A dog or a cat breathes air and drinks water occasionally, but fish and coral are completely surrounded by their environment every second of their lives. That means water quality affects things like respiration, stress levels, disease resistance, and long-term health. Now, even small amounts of certain contaminants can slowly stress fish over time. And in reef aquariums, where we keep sensitive corals and invertebrates, water chemistry becomes even more important. Another key point is that aquariums are closed environments. In nature, oceans and rivers are constantly being diluted and refreshed. But in aquarium water, substances tend to accumulate over time. So understanding what goes into the water at the start is incredibly important. Most municipal tap water is treated to make it safe for humans to drink, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's ideal for aquariums. Tap water often contains things like chlorine, chloramines, dissolved minerals, trace metals, nitrate, phosphate, and silicates. Now, some of these substances are added intentionally. For example, chlorine or chloramine is used to kill harmful bacteria in drinking water, and that's great for public health, but chlorine can damage fish gills if it enters an aquarium untreated. Tap water also naturally picks up minerals and metals as it travels through soil and plumbing systems. These can include things like calcium, magnesium, copper, and others. Now, some minerals aren't harmful at all. In fact, some are beneficial, but the key point is that tap water chemistry varies widely depending on location. Two hobbyists in different cities might have completely different water coming out of their faucet. One way aquarists measure the amount of dissolved material in water is with something called TDS, which stands for Total Dissolved Solids. This meter doesn't identify specific substances. Instead, it measures the overall concentration of dissolved ions in the tap water. For example, many tap water sources might read somewhere between 100 and 400 TDS. That means there are hundreds of parts per million of dissolved material in the water. Now, that material might include things like minerals, salts, trace metals, and nutrients. Again, not all of these are harmful, but they are variables that affect the aquarium. Experienced aquarists often prefer starting with water that has very few dissolved substances, so they can control exactly what goes into the system. Certain substances in tap water can contribute to common aquarium issues. For example, phosphate is a nutrient that algae can use to grow. So if phosphate levels are high in source water, it can contribute to algae outbreaks. Now, silicates are another thing that can contribute to something called diatom blooms, which many aquarists see as brown dusting on surfaces in newer tanks, typically around the sand bed. Trace metals like copper can be harmful to invertebrates, especially corals and shrimp. And then chlorine or chloramine must always be neutralized before adding tap water to an aquarium. Again, this doesn't mean tap water is always bad. Some freshwater aquariums do very well using conditioned tap water. But the important concept is that water chemistry influences the entire ecosystem of the tank. Over time, hobbyists have developed several methods to manage aquarium water quality. One of the most common is using water conditioners that neutralize chlorine and chloramine. These products make tap water safe for fish by removing harmful disinfectants. Another option some people use is distilled water or bottled water, which contains fewer dissolved substances than tap water. However, the most common method used by serious hobbyists, especially in reef aquariums, is something called RODI filtration. Now, RODI systems remove a large percentage of dissolved substances from tap water. This produces very clean water that aquarists can then remineralize or mix with salt to achieve the desired chemistry. In other words, instead of starting with unpredictable tap water, hobbyists start with a blank canvas. Now, what you can see on my TDS meter for a part of my RODI filtration system is that the water coming into the deionization chambers is registering at 6 parts per million for total dissolved solids. After passing through this deionization, it then is reading that there are 0 parts per million of total dissolved solids that are detectable. Now, there could be anywhere between 1 and 9 parts per 100 million remaining, or in the parts per trillion, which is so minute that it basically no longer has a significant impact on your aquarium water. The key idea behind all of this is control. Aquariums are small ecosystems, and water chemistry is the foundation of that system. If the starting water already contains unknown substances, it becomes harder to predict how the aquarium will behave. But if you begin with clean, controlled water, you can intentionally add the elements that fish and coral actually need. That's one of the reasons experienced aquarists often pay close attention to water preparation. It reduces variables and makes the entire system easier to manage. So, now that we understand what can be in aquarium water, the next logical question is, how exactly do aquarists remove all of those dissolved substances? In the next video, we're going to break down how RODI filtration actually works, what each stage of the filter does, and why it's so widely used in reef aquariums. If you're interested in building a stable aquarium system from the ground up, that's definitely a topic you'll want to understand.